From the towering Wasatch Mountains of the American Southwest, we welcome you to this episode of Undiscovered Utah. This show focuses on the mysteries that surround the rugged, difficult, and sometimes deadly American Southwest. I'm your host, JB, and tonight we're talking about an area of Utah littered with ghost towns. If you like visiting ghost towns, I think you're going to love this episode. Let me tell you something. The part of Utah we're going to be talking about tonight might be the part of the state that people know the least about. That's a shame because there is so much rich history in this area. This area is often referred to as, well, before I tell you that, I have a little trivia question for all of you. Are you ready? Name the mascots for the 2002 Winter Olympics that were held here in Utah. Wow, can you believe that was 20 years ago? That messes with your head. Here's a hint. There were 4 of them. That's right, 4 of them. Okay, you got them? Here are their names. Let's see how many you got right. The mascots were Powder. It was a white rabbit that represented the greatest snow on earth, and the ski industry here in Utah. The ski industry brings in over $10 billion a year to the state of Utah. Copper was the next mascot. Copper was a coyote that represented another natural resource that is abundant in Utah and also brings in billions of dollars to the economy every year. The next mascot was a black bear by the name of coal, another natural resource that is vital to Utah's economic future that brings in about $8 billion a year. Powder, copper, and coal. But wait, that's only 3. That's correct. The 4th mascot's name was Otto. Otto was a sea otter. What? Why a sea otter? Well, Otto was the mascot for the Paralympic Games. Don't ask me where the sea otter came from. The first 3 make perfect sense. Powder, copper, and coal. Okay, back to tonight's story. The area for tonight's topic is often referred to as coal country. This area is mostly in Carbon County, with the city of Price being the county seat. The story of Utah's coal country is fascinating. And it started as soon as pioneers of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints started to arrive in the Salt Lake Valley in 1847. When Brigham Young reached the foothills of Immigration Canyon, he looked over the Salt Lake Valley and said, "This is the right place. Drive on." The Salt Lake Valley looked very different back in 1847. It was just sagebrush and rabbit brush and a very few trees. Not long after arriving, the pioneers soon realized that to survive the cold winter, they would need a lot of wood for burning. Just one problem. They needed to build cabins with the limited lumber the area provided. They needed something else to burn, to keep them warm over the winter months. Expeditions were sent out to look for coal deposits. One expedition went to the Purple Cliffs. The other one went to the Vermilion Cliffs. The Vermilion Cliffs are in the Kanab area, and the Purple Cliffs are in the Price area. Coal was discovered in the Purple Cliffs by a man by the name of Caleb Rhodes. Yes, this is the same Caleb Rhodes of the Lost Rhodes mine that we talked about in a previous episode. Price is a long way from Salt Lake City, and trying to haul wagons full of coal up and over the Wasatch Mountains was almost an impossible task, considering the amount of coal needed in Salt Lake. So Brigham Young staked a reward for $1,000 to the first person that could find an 18-inch thick vein of coal within 40 miles of Salt Lake City. Summit and Sanpete counties were two logical areas to look for the mineral. Sanpete County is just over the mountains from Carbon County. Soon, a mine was started near Wells. Just one problem. Wells is about 120 miles from Salt Lake City. Another coal mine was established near what later became the town of Colville in Summit County. I wonder how they came up with that name. The good news is that Colville is much closer to Salt Lake City. The bad news is it's still further away than 40 miles. It's closer to 60 miles. Both mines were much closer than the Purple Cliffs of what is now Carbon County. But neither mine qualified for the $1,000 reward. Brigham Young was a stickler for the rules. As the Transcontinental Railroad inched closer to Ogden, Utah, the need for copious amounts of coal were skyrocketing due to the steam engines that needed the coal to generate the steam. So the mines in Colville and Wells did just fine, even without the reward. Soon, rail lines were being put in everywhere, and Price was no exception. Trains could transport the coal discovered in Price not only to Salt Lake City, but all over the country. The coal rush was on. In 1877, a man by the name of Peter Morgan found a rich vein of coal in the mountains high above Price and along the Price River. He established the Pleasant Valley Coal Company and called the mine Winter Quarters. Winter Quarters was located near the modern-day town of Schofield, Utah. Mining camps were popping up all over the area. Places like Coal City, Nolan, Clear Creek, Castle Gate, Sunnyside, Kenilworth, Hiawatha, and New Peerless quickly became booming camps. Mining coal is a very dirty, difficult, and dangerous job. And most of the coal miners were immigrants from countries like Finland, Italy, Greece, and Mexico. If the United States was the melting pot of the world, then Price and the surrounding area was the melting pot for Utah. The working conditions for the miners were less than ideal. Safety is always a concern when it comes to mining, especially when you're mining a flammable material. But in the late 1800s, it was all about revenue, and not much focus was put into safety. Complaints of safety concerns made it to the Utah Capitol, and in 1896, lawmakers passed a law to regulate mine safety and appointed a coal mine inspector to see that safety regulations were adhered to. But one coal mine inspector couldn't possibly oversee all the mines in the Utah area. Then on May 1st, 1900, tragedy struck at the Winter Quarters mine when a gigantic explosion ripped through the number 4 mine. Over 200 men and boys were killed in the blast. The two neighboring towns of Schofield and Clear Creek were devastated by the tragedy. One family, by the name of Hunter, lost 11 family members in the mine that day. Another family, by the name of Luma, just moved to Utah from Finland in March of 1900. On the day of the blast, the Luma family lost 7 sons and 3 grandsons. This was the worst mining disaster to ever happen in the United States up to that date. Then tragedy struck again 24 years later at the Castle Gate mine. Another huge blast ripped through the mine, killing 172 men and boys. The two mines were only 15 miles apart. As the crow flies, the community was outraged. After the winter quarters disaster, labor organizations swept in to organize labor unions in this target-rich environment. In 1903, the unions and their miners went on strike. The strike lasted over a year. The mine owners and the union leaders couldn't come to an agreement. Almost all the coal miners lived in housing provided by the mine owners. The mine owners also owned all the stores, and the stores only accepted the mine's own tokens as payment. So, after a long and nasty strike, the mine owners evicted any miners that participated in the strike from their homes. They were now homeless and couldn't purchase anything at any store in the area. To make things worse, extreme prejudice existed between the immigrant groups and the mine owners. Tempers were at a boiling point. The governor of the state of Utah, Governor Heber M. Wells, had to call out the National Guard to keep the peace in the coal fields of Carbon County. There are so many fun stories that I could share about these old ghost towns, but we don't have time tonight, so maybe I'll share just a couple. Just north of the town of Helper, along present-day U.S. Highway 6, is a short-lived town called Martin. The area that was called Martin was originally just north of Helper, but it was geographically separated from the rest of Helper by Balanced Rock Mountain. It is said that the people that lived in Martin were considered second-class citizens. I don't know if that's true or not, but one thing that is true, Martin was home to one of the best stonemasons around. His name was Felice Gigliotti, and yes, he was Italian. Mr. Gigliotti built a truly stunning all-in-one hotel, tavern, store, and gas station. The stonework was amazing. It was a large two-story building made with stones he had hand-cut himself. The building is still standing today, but is in ruins. The roof is gone. But it's still worth a stop and a look over the fence. The building is located just off Highway 6 on North Martin Road. Anyway, one cold winter day, a fight broke out in the neighborhood of Martin. It soon grew to include almost the entire neighborhood. So, the police were called in. But the roads were a little too muddy for the police to get to the neighborhood of Martin. Oh man, this upset everyone in Martin, and they quickly forgot about whatever it was they were fighting over and united in their dislike for the city of Helper and the Helper Police Department. So, after some lively and sometimes heated debate, the neighborhood of Martin decided to break off from the city of Helper and create their own little town of Martin, with its own government and its own police. If the citizens of Martin thought the government and police of Helper were poorly run, well, their own government and police was much worse. The town had no revenue, so the police weren't getting paid. Because the police were not getting paid, they were not doing much policing. The town's government was disorganized and ill-equipped to manage the town's needs. Soon the town's power was cut off, and not long after, the town's water supply was cut off. People started to move out of Martin as quickly as they could. Then a new highway was built that bypassed the town of Martin completely. That was the last nail in the coffin, and in time the town of Martin was absorbed back into the town of Helper. Today, if you visit the neighborhood of Martin, you will see that it is far from a ghost town, as most of the homes are occupied once again. After you visit Martin, you should really check out Helper. It is a fun little town to visit. As a matter of fact, on the first Friday of every month, they find a reason to party in Helper, usually along Main Street. Today, many of the old mining camps are ghost towns or close to it. You can still see the century-old mining ruins. The hollowed-out shells of old company stores and company housing are scattered throughout Carbon County. I had the opportunity to live in the Price area for many years as a young boy. Coal mining was still the lifeblood of the community back then. But the real glory days were in the 1930s and 40s. When you're in Helper, stop in at the Western Mining and Railroad Museum on Main Street. Take in the sights of Old Helper and learn why it is called Helper. We told you that story in a previous episode. At the town civic center is where you will get to meet the famous Big John. This is a massive statue of a coal miner and makes a great photo op. There is so much to see and explore, like all the old ghost towns. As you visit them, please be respectful of the no trespassing signs. Take only pictures and nothing else. In many of the areas where the old mining camps were located, active mining might still be going on. Big trucks travel up and down these canyons, so keep an eye out for them. Here is a list of old mining camps you could hunt for if you feel so inclined. Get out a pen and paper. What's that? You don't have access to a pen and paper right now? That's okay. You can always listen to this episode again. We've already mentioned winter quarters in the same area as Colton and Hell. This is sacred ground where the 200 men and boys gave their lives. Please be extremely respectful. Other old mining areas to check out are Consumers, National, Coal City, Watts, Martin, Heiner Moreland, Nolan, Sweets, Royal, Peerless and New Peerless, Spring Canyon, Mutual, Standardville, Little Standard, Rains, Latuda, Hiawatha, Kenilworth, and Castlegate, where Butch Cassidy robbed the mining company. Get out and explore this beautiful part of Utah. Visit the local antique shops and restaurants. Price offers nice accommodations if you want to make a weekend out of the trip. Or combine this area with a visit to 9 Mile Canyon on a long holiday weekend. Most people drive right past Carbon County on their way to Moab or Lake Powell, but I highly recommend Carbon County as your destination for at least one trip. And remember, Carbon County is your northern gateway to the San Rafael Swell. If you would like more information about tonight's episode, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at info@undiscoveredutah.com. You will find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, and be sure to follow us. Just search for Undiscovered Utah. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Undiscovered Utah. Join me next week as I share more about the Great Southwest. Good night, everybody.